Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webcast. My name is Ben Frost, and I'm the Public Information Officer for APA's Northern New England chapter and one of the coordinators of the Planning Webcast series. This series is brought to you by a consortium of over 40 of APA's chapters and divisions. The consortium itself is not affiliated with APA, but rather is a loose-knit association whose mission is to provide high-quality, free webinars on topics important to planners that will also help them meet their certification maintenance requirements. Today is Friday, December 11th, 2015, and we'll hear the presentation, Equity Issues in Transportation Planning, Getting More Voices into the Conversation. For help during today's webcast, you can type a question or comment into the chat box. But if you have truly technical questions, you'll need to call GoToWebinar at the 1-800 number shown on your screen for tech support. For content-related questions related to the presentation, please type those questions into the question box also located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. We'll answer those questions as time allows at the end of the presentation during the Q&A portion. On your screen is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions, and I want to take a little time to thank all of them, all of the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible. It is the financial support of these chapters and divisions that allows us to do these free of charge to you. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Transportation Planning Division. To learn more about divisions, you can go to www.planning.org/divisions, and chapters, the same thing, just /chapters. This is, in fact, the last webcast in our 2015 schedule. We have put on 37 webcasts, all of which have been qualified for 1.5 CM credits. Some of these are also available for distance education credits for those of you who can't tune in live. We're scheduling 2016 webinars now. Right now we're setting up webinars in January, February, and March. If you have an idea for a webcast, or if you've seen a presentation or given a great presentation recently and want to share it with a national audience, please let us know. Make your proposal known to your chapter or division. And if you don't know who to contact there, just email me at bfrost@nhhfa.org, and I'll point you in the right direction. To log your CM credits for this session, go to planning.org, log into your APA account, navigate to the CM page, select Activities by Provider at the top, type in Transportation Planning Division, and then you can select by the title of the session, or you can search by the event number 9003732. You can like us on Facebook, as many people have, and this is perhaps the best way to find the most up-to-date information on the Planning Webcast series. You can also go to the Ohio Planning website for a PDF of today's presentation, and this is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube on our YouTube channel at that link. And now I'd like to introduce Brian Laverty, who will introduce today's speakers. Brian?
Thanks, Ben. Every community is affected by the transportation planning process because we all use the network. Many communities have historically not been heard, however. And the challenge in today's age is to go beyond simply giving equal access to the process and instead to seek out the communities whose voices have gone unheard in the past. This webinar will highlight ways in which planners and activists are bolstering participation in the transportation planning process. And we have three excellent presenters today who themselves embody the breadth of the transportation planning world because they come from different backgrounds. One comes to us with a public agency background, another from the academic realm, and a third from the activist community. Kristin Haldeman will be our first speaker. She is a program manager and a 12-year veteran in the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority's Office of Planning. That's Metro for those of you who live in the DC region. She focuses on region and system-wide policy and planning efforts to improve access to Metro Rail and Metro Bus with a specific emphasis on bicycle and pedestrian access and transportation equity. Kristin leads the technical analysis supporting Metro's compliance with Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is the focus of her presentation today. Last year, she co-managed the development of Metro's first public participation plan, and her team over the past 4 years has developed a 6-year capital plan to improve on-site pedestrian and bicycle access. And so without further ado, I'll pass things on to Kristin to begin her presentation.
Thanks, Brian. And I'm glad to be here to present this topic to the community today. I first started in this area of work back when I first started at Metro. And my boss at the time said to me, so I know you do maps. Can I loan you out to the Office of Civil Rights? They need someone who can help make them some maps. So that's really where I started with this because of my GIS background. And since then, we have established a very long, productive, and good relationship with our compliance office. Here at Metro, it's the Office of Equal Employment Opportunity, and along with 2 other offices that work with the planning office to really ensure our compliance as a transit agency with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and those offices are the Office of External Relations and our Office of General Counsel. So I want to be sure to give a shout out to them, but today we'll be speaking specifically about the role that the planning office plays in ensuring compliance. Today I'd like to give you, start off with a little bit of regulatory background, just to set the stage, then talk about one of the important pieces to this process, which is really knowing and understanding our audience. I'll touch a little bit on the technical analysis that we do for this process, and then really the bulk of the presentation will focus on our public engagement process, specifically as it relates to our public participation plan, which Brian referenced in the intro. Just by way of background, this is really the statement that sets us on our path. No person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And I read that just for emphasis. We are a federal grant recipient, which means that we are subject to federal rules and regulations, and in particular this one, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. So you may recognize other titles of the Civil Rights Act. There's gender discrimination, I think it's Title IX, and then there are persons with disabilities, which falls in another category. This one in particular will focus on race, color, and national origin. When we talk about discrimination, certainly in our world, there's 2 types of discrimination that we are focusing on. These are laid out here. The first one is disparate treatment, and that's intentional, and that's the kind of discrimination where you know it when you see it, and it's something that we guard against. But I think it's a little, it's easier to identify than the second, which is disparate impact. And this is where a lot of our work comes in, because oftentimes we believe we're doing something that's going to apply equally to everyone. And a good example for us is a fare increase. And we may say, well, we're going to raise fares on everyone by 25 cents. But based on the way some of our ridership travels, whether it's time of day or mode, perhaps bus versus rail, we can have an unintentionally high and adverse impact on populations that use these services more. And I will talk a little bit about that later. But for another example might be, we think if we place all of our new buses at a garage, and the garage happens to be serving neighborhoods and communities that are non-low income and non-minority, then it turns out that our older buses are in communities that are minority and are low income. So if you don't kind of take that into consideration, you can find yourself in the situation of disparate impact. So that's what we work to guard against. What exactly is transportation equity? Well, of course, it's rooted in the Civil Rights Act, but for us, it means providing equitable access to transportation services by ensuring an equitable distribution of benefits and burdens. So I think it's easy for us to understand sort of the burdens. You know, well, we're raising fares or we're cutting service, and we do our analytics to show whether or not we have an issue in those areas. But we also are called to analyze the benefits distribution. So, if we're adding service or providing a discount on fares, we have to ensure that those are available to minority and low-income riders at the same rates that they are available to non-minority and non-low-income riders. So our analysis, the technical analysis that we do specifically, really seeks to ensure that we are providing equitable access to our benefits as well as our burdens. Title VI in the transit world, these are our general guidance and regulations. We have a circular that is promulgated by FTA. We are, again, the FTA. The FTA is our grantor. And a lot of what I'll talk about today is found in this circular. And then we're also bound by 2 executive orders. You might have noticed back in on the 3rd slide where I noted the language from Title VI. It did not include low-income or limited English proficient populations. However, these 2 executive orders speak to a requirement to ensure meaningful access to both low-income persons and limited English proficient persons. And the environmental justice executive order is really the one that speaks primarily to low-income persons. So those 3 are really kind of the pillars of our regulatory environment as it relates to Title VI. So who must comply? Again, it's anyone receiving federal funds, and under the FTA circular, we have states and local DOTs that receive federal funding. MPOs receive federal funding, and then there's us. There's the transit agency. And a lot of the analysis here applies specifically to fixed route providers, so those providing bus and rail service. Non-compliance can mean a loss of funding, so we do take this very seriously. Just sort of a general outline of some of the program requirements. For all those entities I named on the previous slide, DOTs, MPOs, and transit agencies, there are a list of general requirements. Perhaps one of the most comprehensive is that we are each to submit a board-approved, or rather governing entity-approved, Title VI program every 3 years. And there are about 17 or so components to that Title VI program. 2 significant components of that program are a language assistance plan and a public participation plan. And really, these 2 go hand in hand. I'm going to speak more about our public participation plan at the end. But these are documents. We do have both of them available on our website if anyone is interested in seeing them. But they work together to help us ensure meaningful participation from our Title VI population. The general requirements also include complaint process requirements, monitoring of subrecipients, and we have some requirements related to when we site facilities. The transit-specific side, there are these 4 areas that we as transit agencies really have to dig in and do some significant work on. The ones highlighted in yellow are those that are required of transit agencies who have greater than 50 vehicles in service. And that obviously is us. We have about 1,500 buses and almost 1,000 rail cars. So we work on all of these, and specifically I'm going to talk about the collecting and reporting of data on our customer demographics and travel patterns, and a little bit about conducting service and fare equity analyses. So really, the basis for all of the work that we do in this area is knowing and understanding our customers. And we do that in several ways. We use this information in our technical analyses, which I'll touch on in a bit, and significantly within our public engagement work. So on the technical analyses, again, this is where we do demographic and ridership analysis to understand when, where, and how our riders are using the system. And then we have developed thresholds to determine, whether there is an adverse impact when we are conducting a service change or a fare change. So some of the ways that we know our customers are these. We look at where they reside, what mode they use, is it bus or rail, where do they ride, when do they ride, what are the languages they speak, what are some of the cultural differences of our communities, income differences, race and ethnicity, and how they receive information. All of this we need to know to help us ensure equity as an agency. So just a little bit about us. We're the transit provider for the Washington Metropolitan area. Our service area is about 1,500 square miles. We have 3 states and 8 localities that make up our compact and our service area. Our rail service, we have 91 stations. We just added 5 about 1.5 years ago. We've got about 700,000 daily trips on our rail system. Our Metro bus system, about 307 routes and 450,000 daily trips. We also provide paratransit service, our Metro Access service. There are about 6,000 daily trips on Metro Access. So that puts us, well above the threshold for the requirements related to Title VI. So let me tell you a little bit about, again, how we seek to understand the riders and people in our service area. This map is our service area using census data. And what the map shows is essentially our minority and low-income populations within the service area. To break that out further, again, using census data, we can look at the race and ethnicity of our citizens by residence. As you can see, we've got a significant minority population. In fact, the region itself is majority minority. And the interesting thing I think about this is the concentration of our minority and low-income persons on the eastern side of the region. Actually, it was the 2000 census, I believe it was, Brookings described our region once they had looked at the census data as a region divided. And this was one of the telling factors that they had published based on the census data. So for us, that means when we're doing work that involves our jurisdictions on the eastern side of the region, we already know that we have a heavy minority and low-income population. Again, the census and ACS-5 data, we're looking at language populations in our service area. And specifically, we're looking at limited English proficient populations. And this helps inform our language access plan and also our public participation plan. And this is at, again, the region at a very high level, but you can see that our Spanish LEP population is the most significant in this region. So as an agency, we are providing our information in both English and Spanish as a general rule. Ridership demographics. So census data tells us where people live and the demographics of where they live. Our ridership information tells us how they use the system. And in order to get this information, we conduct rider surveys, passenger surveys, and the guidance actually speaks to this. We're supposed to be collecting this information every 5 years or less. So we will be conducting a rail passenger survey this spring, and we just completed a bus passenger survey in 2014. So with that information, we can pull together a system-wide analysis of the ridership demographics, and we can also drill down to station level and bus line level demographics as well. So the thing to point out here is that our bus ridership is much more heavily geared towards minority and low-income riders. So as a policy, when we're doing work on bus, whether it's on the service side or on the fare side, we are particularly mindful of the demographics of bus. This is just another way we can illustrate some of the populations in our service area. This comes to us from our rail survey, and this slide simply shows Hispanic ridership on Metro Rail by station. So this is by station of entry. You can see the largest purple dots are where we have our greatest concentrations of Hispanic riders. So as I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, we're going to take a look at two things today, technical analysis and our public engagement. So because our technical analysis can be very involved and a lot of spreadsheet-based, data-heavy work, I'm just going to touch on it if anyone is interested in kind of getting into the weeds. My contact information is at the end, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it offline. I'm going to give you just a high-level overview of essentially what our requirement is for conducting service and fare equity analyses. Anytime we have major service changes on rail or bus, we have fare changes or any changes to how we access fare media, when we site new facilities, or when we have a new starts or other new fixed guideway system project, we are required to conduct an equity analysis. Our Silver Line, which opened in 2014, we conducted that under the new starts requirement. Once we take a look at the ridership impacts under any of these actions, we then have to determine whether or not there are adverse impacts to our minority and low-income populations. And my next slide will talk a little bit about the methodology that we use to do that. And then the thing to note about the service and fare equity analysis is that while it's a technical analysis, it also requires public engagement. So the two processes become married here for these equity analyses. So how do we define equitable here at Metro? Before we can get going on our equity analyses, we have to do at least two things. The first of which is to define what constitutes a major service change, and that was one of the first bullets in the previous slide for bus or rail. And we have defined that with the help of our public. We also have to define thresholds for what is considered disparate impact or disproportionate burden. If you remember disparate impact from one of the earlier slides, this is the unintentional discrimination based on patterns of ridership, and disparate impact applies to minorities, and the disproportionate burden threshold applies to low-income populations. We use them together because we know that we have a high minority and low-income population riding our system as a whole. But what we have done is set these thresholds, and it's a sliding scale to look at the difference between minority and low-income riders, impacts on minority and low-income riders, and impacts on non-minority and non-low-income riders. And again, we have to secure public involvement in the development of these policies. And this just gives you a quick flavor of what we mean by ridership patterns. You can see that we have minority and low-income riders traveling at different rates at different times of the day and at different distances. We're a distance-based system, so data that we have it allows us to really dig in and look at not only your fare type by time of day, but also whether it's peak or off peak. So the question that we ask ourselves when we're talking about public engagement is, does our feedback reflect our demographics? And so there was a period where we weren't always sure that we did, and we would go out and a couple times we tried online surveys, and we weren't seeing the numbers that we wanted to see, and so we started to try and understand why that might be and what we could do to improve our responses and our engagement from minority and low-income populations. And the FTA, through its updated circulars on Title VI and environmental justice, really gave us the perfect opportunity to answer that very question. And that was by requiring that we develop a public participation plan. And I think this was a really helpful process for us. We engaged a consultant team to help us who were very engaged themselves, had a lot of great ideas. So working together, we pulled together and published our public participation plan last September, and I have the link to that at the end of this presentation. I can also send it to you if you're not able to get it off the presentation. But it's very robust, and it speaks to a lot of the things that we've been talking about. What are the ways that you reach our protected populations when they're really not very easy to reach? So it took us about a year to develop this public participation plan. We interviewed peer agencies. We met with more than 60 staff here at Metro who engage regularly with the public. We emailed and spoke with more than 200 community-based organizations who serve these populations, and then we held 23 public events throughout our region that we reached about 3,500 customers, and really asking them, how do you like to receive information? What can we do to help you engage more with us? And by the way, we administered a survey, both in person and online, in 7 languages other than English, and that really again, helped us, even through this process, reach more of our constituency. So the goals of our plan, up here I won't go through the definitions, but we wanted it to be inclusive, collaborative, responsive, and consistent. And as we work to implement it, I think we're coming up to the end of our first year of full implementation of this public participation plan. I think we're achieving all of this, and hopefully we'll even improve upon ourselves over time. But the key findings from our public participation plan work was primarily to involve our Title VI populations. We need to go where they are. We can't expect them to come to us to public hearings and public meetings. We have people who are busy, they have families, they might work 2 or 3 jobs, they might not work a 9-to-5 job. So we found that when we go to where they are, we have a better chance of speaking to people who we might not otherwise hear from. We want to be sensitive to other cultures and the way that people like to engage. We want to make it convenient for people to attend events when we do have them. We want to make sure that we translate the materials and use a lot of graphics, ensure that we're using ethnic media to help get the word out. We want to include children in the process. Oftentimes, someone might not be able to attend an event because they have their kids with them. So what we've found is if we can provide some children's activities at the events that we do hold, they've got something to keep the kids occupied while the parents can come and kind of think about what we're talking about. We want to work with our community-based organizations to further reach into the communities. And then we want to close the loop. We want to follow up with people at the end to acknowledge and use their input. Recommendations for us that came out of this were really that we should establish a lead department for public outreach, and we have. We have our Office of External Relations, who now we've got several full-time staff, very engaging staff who have second language skills. We're out in the community on buses, at rail stations, at bus stops, at cultural events, talking to people, and really kind of helping to organize our outreach processes for the projects that we have. We are in the midst of establishing a CBO advisory committee or outreach committee to help us cultivate those partnerships. We're developing some online tools for staff, using our cultural and language appropriate media to reach our populations, and really trying some non-traditional outreach formats. Again, meeting people where they are and when they gather. And then lastly, measuring our performance, and I think that's important for us as we refine our strategies. So just in terms of implementing it, it's not just for the projects that require an equity analysis. Long-range planning projects require public participation, whether it's long-range planning. We have our strategic plan, momentum, we reach into the community. Amenities and infrastructure, we're recently getting some feedback on fare gates, and we asked our public to come in and help us identify issues or things that they liked about some of the new infrastructure. When we conduct our environmental analyses for NEPA, again, if we're doing service changes, changing the route, the frequency of the bus, and I'll talk a little bit about a project that we just completed with respect to service changes. Whether it's a public information campaign, for example, we're doing a lot of escalator work, so getting information out to people about that, and then really looking, when we have our annual budget process, and if we're ever thinking about fare changes, we want to be sure that we engage our public. So where do we begin? We develop a project communications and outreach plan. This, again, was one of the recommendations that came out of our public participation plan. And in this process, we all get together at the beginning, the project manager and our external relations staff and other key players. We sit down, we go through project identification, we talk through the scope and timeline. We get information together about the demographics of the project area. We look at the budget, and then the other information that will help us get into the public realm and into communities to help understand what their needs are. And then our external relations staff really work with the project team to determine the purpose of the public communications. What do we want to hear back from people about? What do we want to discuss with them? Oftentimes it's alternatives, like, we're thinking of doing this, or that, or do you have any other ideas that could be useful to our process? We'd like to hear from you. And then it's really pulling it all together and implementing it. Lastly, tracking our success. So we've got a number of tools that we've developed to help us understand how well we did with our public outreach. And these are little documents, some post-activity summaries, post-project evaluations. We're going to get together annually to kind of discuss what worked and what didn't work, and look at our performance measures. And in particular, we want to look at, well, let's see, what are the demographics of our project? Did the people that we spoke to or heard from, did the demographics of those folks match the project demographics? How much ridership was impacted by this project? How many riders did we hear from? So there are, a number of other measures that we're tracking. In the interest of time, I'm just going to talk a little bit about those past two. But again, we're happy to talk about them in more detail later. And there's information in the public participation plan online. The last thing I will discuss is our, a project that we just completed, and this was our 2015 Bus State of Good Operations service change proposal. And this process started really in July, where our bus planning staff proposed 81 different service adjustments in the district, Maryland and Virginia. Along with that were 3 tariff or fare proposals, and it affected about 1,400 bus trips. So we went out and we met the public where they were on buses at bus stops. We had 29 roadshow events, we called them. We had direct mail to about 36,000 customers on high-impact bus routes. We reached out to community-based organizations who would have riders that would take some of these routes. We had a targeted marketing and media campaign. We had one public hearing. And through all of those efforts, including an online survey that was administered on both online and on paper, we received more than 7,000 comments. And, you know, if we take a look at the number of trips that were affected, about 14,000, that's a pretty good response rate. So the final outcome of this was that instead of 81 service proposals, we had 51 that went to final recommendation. There were 2 controversial ones that ended up not being recommended because of the public feedback. And then our board of directors gave a real shout out to our public outreach team because they were very impressed with the amount of outreach that we've done and the number of people that we had reached. And they gave staff kudos for the stellar effort. So I think that's all I have for today. I'm happy to take questions at the end. There are the website to access our public participation plan. The information is at the base of this slide. And again, we can provide that afterwards. And the plan, we do have an executive summary, which you might want to start with because the plan itself is quite long. But it is also available in seven different languages. Again, feel free to reach out to us directly for additional questions that we may not get to today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristin. And I just wanted to remind everybody that the contact info for all 3 presenters will be showing on your screen while we're doing the Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you weren't quite quick enough to jot down Kristin's contact info and you wanted to follow up with her, you'll get a chance to see it again in a little while. And questions are already coming in. Thank you very much. And everybody, please just remember you can send your questions in at any point, and we'll have one combined Q&A at the end. So I wanted to go ahead and introduce our second presenter, who is Anastasia Loukaitou-Sideris, and I do sincerely hope that I didn't butcher that, Anastasia. She is a professor of urban planning and an associate dean of the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. She holds degrees in architecture and urban planning. Her work spans a variety of topics, including examination of the impacts of rail transit lines on communities, transit and pedestrian safety, transportation needs of women, which is the focus of her presentation today, environmental determinants of crime, and cultural uses of neighborhood parks among different ethnic and age groups, and several other topics as well. She has served as a consultant to numerous federal and state agencies, as well as advocacy groups and research organizations. She is very well published. I couldn't begin to list all of her books and articles, so I encourage you to check out the CM listing for this webinar to see a little bit more detail on some of the things that Anastasia has published if you'd like to follow up and read any of her work, or check out her bio on the UCLA website, which has that info as well. And so without any further ado, I'll pass it on to Anastasia to begin her presentation.
Thank you, Brian, for this very kind introduction. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on your time zones. I'm going to concentrate today on a particular group in the city, a big group, and that's women, and talk about issues of mobility and security. And to begin with, I would say that physical mobility, of course, denotes the ability to move from one place to another smoothly, quickly, without impediment. And mobility enhances accessibility, which is the ability to access, take advantage of different amenities in the city, such as parks, supermarkets, schools, but also jobs and economic opportunities. For this reason, physical mobility is often linked to opportunities for the achievement and enjoyment of a better life and more material resources. Historically, however, and even at present, not all social have enjoyed and have all context, for example, urban versus rural. And such differences and nuances are not always addressed by policymakers. So in this table, I show some of the particular gender differences in travel patterns as a number of scholars and researchers have discovered. I'm talking here specifically about countries of the global north, including the US. We know that women commute on average shorter distances, but we do have some variations based on their sociodemographic characteristics. Women tend to make more total trips in the city. However, their average commute trip time is shorter, but these numbers have started to converge in the US. Women tend to use public transportation more than men. They tend to use carpools and van pools more than men. Here in the US, we know that fewer women bike than men. If there is only one family car, women tend to use it more than men, to use it less than men. On average, women are less likely to own a car or have a driver's license, but this has also started changing. Actually, I believe as of 2006, we have almost the similar numbers of women and men having driver's licenses. However, what we do know for sure is also that women have more complicated trips with multiple destinations, what transportation planners call trip chaining. And a lot of these trips that women undertake relate to household errands and children-related errands. Now, women's mobility in cities can be challenged by cultural, economic, physical, and psychological constraints, but also inadequate transportation policies that do not seem to respond to some specific women's needs. In terms of cultural constraints, women are typically considered the primary caregivers for children and elderly parents, and are mostly responsible for domestic chores. In the US, we know that women allocate twice more time than men to such chores and elder care. And such responsibilities affect their mobility as they reduce the amount of time for discretionary activities and increase trip chaining. We also know that studies of women's travel find that it typically involves more other people than the travel of men's, typically again young children or elderly relatives, and is often associated with household chores. Surveys of women transit riders have noted the hurdles they encounter, for example, when they carry large items such as strollers, packages, shopping bags on buses and trains. Ironically, while mobility may be empowering for most individuals, scholars have also noticed a sort of hypermobility that can be constraining women when a lot of suburban mothers, for example, they have to be constantly behind the wheel of their cars, transporting their children to various destinations, sometimes long distance. And these service trips have been labeled the mobility of care, but they do add some special burdens, mostly on women. In terms of economic hurdles, these include lack of adequate resources that affects mobility, and globally, the proportion of women below the poverty level is higher than the proportion of men. Although the number of women who own and drive cars has increased consistently over the years in the US, there are a lot of underprivileged and immigrant women without cars, and more than men. When only one car exists in the family, men are more likely to use it for work, even if both spouses are employed. Physical barriers to women's mobility are embedded in the design of urban form, especially, I would say, in suburban and exurban areas. An urban form that often separates land uses has limited and disconnected transit networks, sometimes even lacks sidewalks and other environmental amenities that may encourage walkability, and often requires an over-reliance on private automobiles for the accomplishment of household chores. And since women are disproportionately carrying out such chores, these physical barriers seem to affect women more than men. Psychological barriers also play a role in constraining women's mobility. Parents, for example, are more likely to give their sons larger latitude for movement across city spaces than their daughters, who are perceived as more susceptible to the threat of stranger danger. Such social attitudes transcend childhood into adulthood and result in women's underrepresentation in public spaces and their more limited use of things like cycling as compared to men. Studies have shown that a hurdle to women's unobstructed mobility is their fear and anxiety over possible victimization in public spaces and transit environments. And this is a topic I wish to spend some time discussing, actually, because fear and anxiety about personal security impede mobility. And almost every fear of crime use violence against them, but also intimidation, groping, sexual comments, harassment, threats, and other nuisance crimes. The situation is particularly aggravating for low-income and minority women who live in high-crime neighborhoods, may return home from work in late evening hours, and have less private transportation options than more affluent women. For women with more transportation options, the fear of victimization may affect the travel mode choice, the time of travel, and leading them to prefer private automobiles or taxis. And fear is generated by perceived risk and has some significant consequences, leading to precautionary measures and strategies that again affect travel choice, travel time, travel mode. Fear, of course, is influenced by demographic, psychological, and environmental factors, and what you can see in this table are, I'm listing some of them, such as, for example, people's experiences and memories of particular settings, if they have been prior, if they have experienced victimization before or not, how familiar they are with a particular setting, but also sometimes media stories, admonitions about specific places can increase fear. Sociodemographic characteristics such as gender, race, ethnicity, age, poverty, disability affect fear with, of course, women, minority women, low-income women, older women, disabled women more fearful usually on average than white, higher income, able folks. But there are also a number of environmental characteristics that may increase or decrease crime, and fear of crime. And I would like to spend some time discussing about those. But before I do that, I want to say that there are a number of explanations that have been given to why women on average are more fearful in public spaces and transit settings than men. And these include the vulnerability of women because of a lesser physical ability to defend themselves, but also the influence upon them of parental advices, social admonitions, the additional concern that mothers who are accompanied by children may have for their children, some persistent sexual harassment that often is experienced by women when they're walking on the streets, public transportation vehicles, and I should say that this happens in cities of the global north and the global south, as well as media accounts and sanction. Excuse me.
Hello, Anastasia. Could you check your audio connection? You seem to be cutting out.
It looks fine, Brian, for me. I don't know what else to do. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. So in terms of environmental factors that contribute to fear, it seems that women's fear appears situated in particular settings and environmental conditions. So, for example, dark spaces, desolate spaces, spaces that lack surveillance opportunities from surrounding establishments may produce more fear, but also places where there is a lack of maintenance, physical and social disorder, graffiti and litter, and poor environmental quality overall. And in general, we can say that two categories of spaces are particularly frightening to women: enclosed community.
Yes, your connection is cutting out again.
I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. My mic is on. It shows I'm on air.
And we can hear you now. It just cuts out every now and then.
Okay, I'll keep going. I'm sorry, I'll keep going, but I don't know why this happened. The second category of spaces that produce fear are anonymous and deserted open spaces that may provide opportunities for criminals to trap and attack their victims, and nobody is going to see what's happening. No one is going to be there to help if a crime occurs. The absence of visible staff or other passengers on station platforms contributes to concerns about safety. At the same time, sometimes having only one passenger around while waiting for the bus or the train may also appear threatening. I would also say that riders are typically more fearful during their journeys to and from the stop or station, and rather most empirical studies show that a lot of the transit-related incidents take place either in the near vicinity or at the transit station or bus stop, and less on the transit vehicle. And this table actually comes from the UK, from surveys there that shows that women in much higher proportions than men feel afraid and scared in a number of transportation settings. Asked women riders about their safety needs or sought to identify women's proposals and preferences regarding safe and secure travel, despite the fact that we know, and I'm quoting from a study in 2000, that as consumers of transport, women have too often been assumed to have identical needs to men's. However, it is clear that women have travel needs as significant to those of men's, and in many respects distinct from them. There are significant differences between women's transport demands to men's to justify treating women separately. As part of an earlier study in 2009, I conducted interviews with leaders of national women's interest groups who highlight a number of issues relating to women's needs and aspirations for safe travel. My interviewees argued that women riders generally prefer staffing to technological solutions and are a bit skeptical of the tendency of many agencies to replace staff from trains or buses with automated machines. The retrofit of station platforms and bus stops with CCTV cameras offers little comfort to women because a lot of them were wondering if something establishments, location of bus stops near activities, general maintenance and upkeep of transit facilities, regular cleaning of graffiti and litter seem to reduce fear. Policies viewed positively included actually request stop embark from the bus at locations closer to their final destination during late evening hours, taxi cab vouchers for low-income women, real-time information on bus schedules to minimize long waits, public awareness campaigns against violence, visible signs in public places denouncing sexual harassment and groping. On the other hand, women had mixed reactions to segregated transport schemes, which established women-only services or women-only cars on commuter trains and subways. That such programs have been enacted in a number of countries, not in the US. To evaluate the response of US transit operators to women's transit safety needs, I conducted a survey in 2009 of 131 transit agencies in the US. The vast majority of these agencies have not developed particular programs and interventions and have not tailored security strategies to specific needs of their female clients. While 2/3 of the agencies in the survey indicated that female passengers have distinct safety and security needs, only about 1/3 believed that transit agencies should put into place specific programs for them. Only 3, I repeat 3, of the surveyed agencies had instigated programs targeting specifically the security needs of women riders. Interestingly, a significant number of agencies rightly provide special services to other subgroups of vulnerable customers, such as senior citizens, handicapped individuals, but they reported as being worried that they may be accused of reverse discrimination if they develop specific security strategies for women. Additionally, the study showed a mismatch between the existing safety and security practices of many transit operators and the needs and desires of many women passengers. US transit operators, I found in the survey, tend to concentrate security measures on the more enclosed, much more easily controllable parts of their system, and generally do not have the power or neglect to control more open and public parts. Similarly, most agencies seem to privilege technological over human security measures, probably because of cost issues, but this goes contrary to a lot of women's wishes. So how can we increase women's mobility? How can we address some of the hurdles that many women face in the everyday movement? I think that we really need to adopt multi-pronged approaches that, and I'm going to say a few things about research, design, transport policy, and transport technology. In terms of research, we have witnessed an increase in scholarly articles, books, reports about women's mobility. Still more progress is necessary in identifying how particular contexts affect the interplay between gender and mobility. We need to develop more appropriate methodologies for data collection, to cast light on unexplored issues and geographic settings, understand the needs of different subgroups of women, and disseminate the findings beyond the academic communities. For example, research is more developed for particular geographic contexts and topics than others. Most scholarly work focuses on gender mobility and the journey to work of urban women. A whole array of trips related to the mobility of care is understudied. There is also considerably less work on issues relating to mobility patterns of people in rural areas. Filling the gaps of these blind research spots should be a priority for scholars. And I believe that research practitioner dialogues would make research on women's issues in transportation more accessible to transit professionals. So the compilation, publication, dissemination of best practices from different parts of the world would allow transit operators to access information about model programs. In terms of treatments and make travel more that thus not requiring multiple trips, childcare services close to home or work, good public transportation connections, pedestrian-friendly local routes with sidewalks, good lighting, enhance the mobility of both men and women, and reduce the need for trip chaining. Additionally, the design of the transit vehicle, the transit stop, the transit system can contribute to comfort and feeling. Place and senior passengers, but also riders pushing strollers to alight them, having a designated space on the bus for the storage of strollers or shopping bags makes the ride comfortable for those carrying. It should be noted that women-friendly neighborhood design is synergistic with the interest in barrier-free and universal design concepts that seek to increase accessibility to neighborhood amenities for seniors and the disabled. And such designs are credited to creating a friendly urban form for seniors, families, children, reducing the need for their campaigns and signage against sexual harassment would be greatly appreciated by a lot of women. Incorporating women's voices in policy development is important because women are real experts of
Hi, Anastasia. It's Ben again. Your audio continues to cut out.
Okay, I'm unable to control that. I'm sorry. And initiated safety audits that had women working with transit officials in neighborhoods and indicating some hotspots of crime or unsafe areas. And lastly, transit agencies should not only focus their resources on the transit vehicle or transit stations, but rather seek to adopt a more whole journey approach that looks into the first mile, last mile situations. And to do this, you really need to coordinate between transit agencies and other entities, such as police departments, planning departments, departments of street services, and the like. And lastly, transportation technology. We have to really find out how new technologies can make travel safer and easier. Can help them better plan the trip, minimize the wait. Studies have shown that especially women riders, women have some doubts about CCTV technologies. This is something that needs to further. Women's travel patterns are often characterized, as I mentioned, by a series of short trips may provide a more alternative to a second car in the household. Neighborhood bike sharing programs may be also appropriate for some cities and neighborhoods. So in conclusion, mobility, accessibility, safe travel are extremely important for everyone, men and women. Access desired destinations safely and with comfort is not only an aspect of the quality of life in cities, but also relates to one's economic security and well-being. Safe travel and unobstructed mobility should be an important right of citizens and a social justice issue. Creating women-friendly urban forms and transportation systems is not only about women. It is not only a woman's issue. It is a family issue. But it also relates to greener cities, as more women will be encouraged to walk or take the transit. And we live in a rapidly aging society, so it is also a senior-friendly transport policy. And so I think some of the initiatives that I outlined would be the necessary first steps towards a transportation system that serves the needs of all passengers and achieves what the quote from one of my interviewees from a local nonprofit in Oakland mentioned. We are talking about nothing less but public transportation justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anastasia. And you know, one thing we might try regarding the problems we had with your audio is between now and the Q&A, if you could possibly switch from your computer's microphone to a landline telephone if you have one. You should be able to do that through the GoToWebinar dialog box you have there. I think it'd be worth a try to see if that can be a little bit better during Q&A. But meanwhile, let me go ahead and introduce our final speaker, who is Zahra Alabanza. Zahra is a mother, activist, and adventurer. She utilizes outdoor adventure, growing food, yoga, and being a creative expression as the root of her community organizing efforts to enhance physical and mental wellness, economic vitality, and environmental stewardship. Zahra is the co-founder of the Atlanta chapter of Red, Bike, and Green. She sees biking as a tool for communal and individual transformation. Her work emphasizes biking as a means of building and rebuilding whole communities that are abundantly safe, confident, healthy, prosperous, and self-determining. So, Zahra, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I value your time and the opportunity to share with you. And I come to you as an activist currently doing work with Red, Bike, and Green around transportation. Red, Bike, and Green is a collective of Black urban cyclists that use biking as a tool to address Black health, wealth, and our environment. I come to you with a multitude of experience that lends to having a voice at these kind of professional spaces and decision-making tables. I'm an expert only in my lived experience, and I hope that that offers insight and sparks ideas to all that are present. The power of transportation. We often take our ability to move through space and time to get where we need to go for granted. Let's sit for a second and think about what it would be like to be transportation dependent, to live in a place that was a transportation desert. How would getting to work, the place in which you make your livelihood, or getting your children to school or to a doctor's appointment, or even grocery shopping look like? Transportation, as you know, transportation, as you know, touches almost every aspect of our lives and plays a pivotal role in shaping human interactions and sustainability. Transportation provides access to opportunity and serves as a key component to addressing poverty, unemployment, and equal opportunity goals. Now think long-term about how having easy access to transportation would or could ultimately affect your personal life. Transportation is a civil right. Remembering the bus boycotts. In 1953, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, staged the nation's first successful bus boycott. Yet we don't quite make the connection between these bus boycotts and our current transportation systems or needs. In this particular boycott, African Americans accounted for the overwhelming majority of Baton Rouge's bus riders and 2/3 of the bus company's revenue. Their economic boycott effectively disrupted the financial stability of the bus company, costing it over $1,600 a day. Hence, the dependency the transportation system had on the people and the dependency the people had on transportation. Fast forward to 1955, we're all familiar with Rosa Parks and how her refusing to give up her seat to a white man in defiance of the local Jim Crow laws contributed to the modern civil rights movement. Her actions sparked new leadership around transportation and civil rights. So when thinking about transportation as a civil rights, we think about smart and equitable transportation systems connecting us to jobs, schools, housing, healthcare services, and even to grocery stores and nutritious foods. Transportation equity is consistent with the goals of the larger civil rights movement and the environmental justice movement. And for millions, transportation is defined as a basic right. The benefits from transportation advancement and investment are not distributed equally among communities, making transportation equity an issue of civil rights and social justice. Transportation continues to be divided along racial lines, but it is a key ingredient in building economically viable and sustainable communities. All communities do not receive the same benefit from transportation advancements and investments. Despite the heroic efforts and the monumental social and economic gains made over the decades, transportation remains a civil rights issue. Transportation investment enhancements and financial resources have provided advantages for some communities, while at the same time other communities have been disadvantaged by transportation decision making. When decisions are made about transportation resources and funding, those decisions are rarely made in consultation with or in consideration of low-income people who tend to rely heavily on public transportation as their means for services. I want you to sit with this and truly think about the power of transportation for all people. Think about yourself, the people you see walking to work or to the doctor's appointment, the person on the bus whose travel time is possibly way too long and longer if they live in a poor community. Think about the third shift worker who rides a bike to work on the sidewalk in the dark. Think about the millions of reasons why general transportation access needs to improve, and then think of biking as a mode of transportation and how much its infrastructure can and needs to be improved to provide folks with another safe, time-friendly transportation option. And that takes me to biking for transportation. Biking for transportation is a form of transportation with numerous health, economic, and environmental benefits. However, in many communities, the benefits of bicycle transport are not accessible to all residents. For low-income and communities of color, the lack of safe places to ride in their neighborhoods, unequal representation in transportation project planning, and unequal financial burdens prevent equal access to cycling and its benefit. 1 in 12 U.S. households does not own an automobile. According to the report, Where We Need to Go, a civil rights roadmap to transportation equity, the average cost of owning a car is just that shy of $10,000. That may not sound like a lot until you realize that the federal poverty level is $22,000 for a family of 4. 1/3 of low-income African-American households do not have access to an automobile. That figure is 25% among low-income Latino families, 13% among Asian households, and 12.1% for whites. Racial minorities are 4 times more likely than whites to use public transit to get around. In one survey, it indicates that 5% of surveyed folks reported commuting to work by bicycle as the primary use of bicycling during the last 30 days, and that was from 2003. In another survey, it indicates in general that 36% of trips on bike were for transport. So for personal errands, visiting friends and relatives, commuting to and from work and school, that accounted for 36% of people transporting themselves on bikes. And what we're seeing here is that generally folks are transporting on bikes, and it's likely that these numbers are not including people who are using bikes and public transportation at the same time to get to where they need to go. People of color bike for transit more, as indicated by People for Bikes in its new report about race, ethnicity, class, and protected bike lanes. The figures that you see look at people who get on bikes on a truly regular basis, at least a couple of times a month on average, or on a weekly basis during the summer and the fall. Other than Latino folks who tend to ride recreationally more often, there's not a lot of variation in the sort of bicycling Americans tend to do the most, which is for fun. But the rates of riding for getting around differ quite a bit. 19% of Blacks, Latinos, and other folks ride collectively for transportation. Again, this is just showing that folks are using bikes as their main mode of transportation more often than we give credit for. So who rides? Now that we are clear that folks are dependent and or choosing to bike as a primary mode of transportation, let's take a look at who actually rides. All too often, we project our perception into reality, and biking is no different. Due to the public image of who rides, we could easily all think that white, male-bodied folks with disposable income are the only people who ride. But I ride, and I know more people like me that ride and fewer folks that fit the stereotypical profile. Knowing who is actually riding is vital. Unfortunately, who is doing something or not doing something determines where resources go. Though I disagree with this in general, let's use our public theory on our behalf. More people of color and low-income folks ride. Let's get them the resources. People of color are leading the U.S. biking boom. Bicycling has become more important travel activity for white Americans, but not nearly as fast as it has become among Americans of color. Black folks have had a documented 90% increase in biking from 2001 to 2009, Latinos with 30% and Asians with 60%. In part, this is because people of color were harder hit by the Great Recession, which caused all racial groups to scale back expensive car trips, even as the number of inexpensive bike trips increased. People of color are more likely to ride bicycles. 30% of Americans aged 3 and up ride a bicycle at least once a year for one reason or another. That number would be lower if only white Americans and African Americans were counted, but Latinos, Asian Americans, Native or Indigenous folks, and Pacific Islanders are more bike quite a bit more. Latinos bike 38%. People of color are most likely to want to bike more than they actually do. Most Americans would like to bike more than they do, but for whatever reason, that's slightly more among Americans of color. So 52% of white folks want to ride more, but 54% of Blacks, 57% of Latinos, and 55% of Asians. Also related to this are Americans of color, especially Blacks, are a bit more likely to see bicycling as a convenient mode of transportation. So 52% of whites see it as a convenient mode, but 60% of Blacks, 56% of Latinos, and 55% of Asian folks see it as a convenient mode of transportation. The lowest income households bike far more for recreation as well as transportation. It might not be a surprise that Americans who make less than $20,000 a year are twice as likely to bike for transportation as other Americans. But what's less discussed is the fact that bicycling is an important way for lots of low-income Americans to have fun at an estimated 10 cents per mile. It sure beats the prices of other ways in which to have fun. And it's a lot of fun to just ride a bike, so it makes sense that more folks with lower incomes are riding. Low-income folks bike for recreation most, 16% who make less than $20,000, 7% who make less than $40,000, 9% of folks making less than $60,000, but it goes up for folks making quite a little bit between $60,000 and $100,000. It goes to 12% of those people using biking as a form of recreation. Low-income folks in transportation, under $20,000 annual income, 7% of those people are riding bikes for transportation. Between $20,000 and $40,000, you have 3% riding bikes for transportation. Between $40,000 and $60,000, 3% of people are riding bikes. And then it goes up a little bit between $60,000 and $100,000, where 4% of people are riding bikes for transportation. So making the connection between this information that I've offered and equitable planning. Transportation is a civil right that not all people have equitable access to. More low-income folks and folks of color are riding for fun and transport, yet are left out of the bike infrastructure planning and decision-making. And we have to ask why. Why is that the case? Equity. Let's make sure we understand what it means to be equitable. Equity is a trendy word right now, and everyone is using it. It's in food, it's in transportation, it's in a lot of different specific social justice areas where this word is coming up. It gets people funding and attention without being held accountable, which is the sad part because accountability is really important. So equity is about fairness. As we have seen, it involves trying to understand and give people what they need to fully enjoy healthy lives. Give people what they need. Equality is sameness. In contrast, it aims to ensure that everyone gets the same thing in order to enjoy full and healthy lives. And if we were all on the same playing field, then equality would work. But because we're not, because of various historical factors, we're not on the same playing field. We have to lean towards equity, and in these pictures you can see a better image of that, where equality gives everybody the same size box to look over a same fence regardless of their height. And equity is saying, well, this shorter person needs more resources to be able to see over this fence, and so that person gets more boxes and more resources to see over the fence versus the tall person. So making the connection equitable planning, transportation funding and planning is inadequate for those who need it most. At one point, transportation spending amounted to $270 billion, and it was the largest public works bill enacted in the nation. And federal government allocates 80% of its transportation funding to highways specifically, but there's 107 million people who bike or walk to work every day, and that mass transportation and built-in infrastructures for biking and walking are underfunded. Within this inadequacy, people of color and low-income communities, despite how much they ride, get less infrastructure funds and are not part of the planning process. So my current experience with the planning process. I can't speak for everyone. What I am sharing are my experiences with the planning process that I've been privy to. My experiences with the process are through the lens of a black woman living in Atlanta, a black woman mother, bike rider, an entrepreneur, an activist, formally educated, and they're my experiences. So what I've experienced is that in the planning world, and as you all know, there's a disproportionate amount of white planners, and that's the first of my concern. Though the urban planning profession is more multicultural than it once was, these figures from the American Planning Association members, you all, show one of the biggest challenges cities face is distributing resources equitably. Almost all of the people whose job it is to convene interest groups and gather community needs and feedback come from a single racial background, likely income, and likely do not live, work, and play in the communities they are working with. This makes it hard for cities to figure out what their residents want and need and contribute to an unequal distribution of infrastructure and other resources. So with this being part of a problem, it has a solution. And I think by broadening your planning teams, and you possibly are already, but this will address the fact that at the table planners tend to be white. Hiring folks that represent the communities you work with and in is a great start. I also would like folks to consider that having teams with different people on them, including more than just planners, which I said you may already do, but if this intersectional approach is taken, then you will diversify not only racial, gender, and income makeup of the people giving insight to future planning, but you will also expand the perspective beyond just planners and the residents that are able to contribute. Imagine a planning team that included the insight and perspectives of educators, healthcare professionals, business owner, creatives, law enforcement, children and youth, parents. You could truly hear what whole communities needed by broadening your planning teams. Something else that I see in the current planning process, and a question that was raised to me, does the current planning process address the diverse planning public? And my answer is going to be no, but let me give you some insight to what the planning process currently looks like to me. Meetings, meetings, and more meetings. Closed-door meetings with city government, investors, and developers. Meetings at noon where only people who are in the field and get paid to attend. Meetings after work where people who can make the time to attend these meetings. Meetings with other interest groups, bike agencies, and organizations. Meetings with the public who are aware of the potential plans and meetings. All kinds of folks are left out of the planning process. Usually the folks left out are the most affected by the plans that do not consider them because they didn't attend the meetings. Per observation, participation, and statistics, the planning process does not address a diverse biking public. It generally still addresses the perceived rider, the white male body with disposable income and his family. Also highly considered are folks who live in financially well-to-do neighborhoods or highly dense areas like downtowns and commerce areas, and the suburbs. There are a lot of first wave gentrifiers being considered as a second wave of gentrification is taking place. These folks feel dismissed, invisible, and not considered when it comes to planning. Though I see more women at various planning tables, they are often white, middle-aged, and middle class. And then when the planning implementation takes place in people of color communities or low-income communities, those members usually did not have any say-so in the planning or implementation and were not considered enough to be included in the plans that ultimately affect their livelihood. For example, take a random neighborhood that is perceived to be poor because it's black. A city has some transportation dollars to spend, so it looks at a previously created list of places bike lanes could go and decides to place a bike lane in the said black community. No one asked the community what it wanted. The bike lane ultimately gets placed in a part of the neighborhood farthest from the place folks would need or want to bike to, and that street is narrow. So yes, this community was considered, but it wasn't in a way that truly benefits the community needs or wants. So with this being a problem of the diverse biking public not being considered, I suggest, I like to offer that people be creative to ensure inclusivity. More people, meeting people where they are. If you want to know what transportation users need and want, meet them at transportation hubs, not at meetings in an office. Offer a meeting at a train station. If you know who you want to use a particular infrastructure, name those people specifically and identify where you may be able to meet them. All people of color do not have the same needs, neither do women or any other generalized group. So if you want to meet a specific group, don't clump them into this large minority group. You really have to name that group in order to meet their needs. You can meet parent residents of any neighbor at a school, and you do not have to just have one meeting. Having multiple or meeting multiple times to build with who you want insight from is really, really important. Oftentimes there's one meeting, and if you miss it, then you're not going to be heard. Include folks in the beginning of the process, not at the end, and always loop back to people you gather insight from. And that part is part of being radically honest. So I often get the experience of being asked, and people that I'm communing with and building with, we're often asked to the tables at the end of a process and in a very disingenuous way that makes us hesitant to even want to participate in the conversation. So yes, you're asking for my input, but plans have been made for the last 10 years for all I know, and now you're asking and it's not really a genuine ask. So that kind of honesty about when you're asking people to be involved is really, really important. Something else that we see in the planning process or questions that we ask is, does the bike facility planning process fairly address neighborhoods, including minority neighborhoods and communities of color? I think we know the answer to this question. It's no, and not fairly. And when people of color communities are considered, it's likely too late because gentrification is occurring and people are already being displaced. But why doesn't the planning process fairly address people of color communities? We have to ask ourselves that. Why is equitable planning not happening across racial lines when income isn't a factor? Why is equitable bike facility planning not happening in poor neighborhoods, especially since these neighborhoods are in need the highest? It begs us to question, what is the point of bike infrastructure? Is it to meet the needs of those most in need? Which is what equity is. Why is a diverse group of folks asking for bike infrastructure, yet only certain groups are being heard? Bike planning and infrastructure is not just about making bikes safe for recreational use or in general. Bike infrastructure makes biking a viable transportation option for not only those dependent upon it, but for those that have the privilege to choose to ride a bike as a main mode of transportation. Along with bike infrastructure making transportation safer, it also makes streets safer for everyone and their communities, for riders, walkers, motorists, the old, the young, able-bodied folks, differently abled folks, and all genders. So I beg folks to see their role in developing and implementing bike infrastructure as much more than we play it out to be. It is a huge responsibility, and it is vital to be inclusive in its planning and implementation. So to address this concern, I ask folks to consider you, the planner, realize your power and leverage it. Not only make sound plans, but advocate. Become politically engaged because you know how your plans can drastically affect the communities that you're putting them in. Realize your power and responsibility to ensuring a fair and just process. It's not only your job, but it's part of contributing to a society that we want to live in. In an effort to create more just planning process, consider centering the most marginalized groups' needs, and you will not only meet their needs, but you'll also meet the needs of the most privileged groups. It's a win-win. And then I ask folks to consider centering an intersectional approach. Perhaps all communities want safe spaces to be healthy, to travel in and out of, to bring more money to their communities, and what to do and wants. And what do you know? Biking does all of that and more. So when we talk about bike infrastructure planning, it becomes imperative to center those who can benefit the most, but also those unlikely benefactors. Bring healthcare professionals, business owners, recreational folks, churches. Bring everybody to the table. Everybody has stake in bike infrastructure, and they may not know it now. So it's upon a collaborative effort to show why bike infrastructure is going to benefit a community. And when you meet, you're going to meet people who are going to push back against bike infrastructure because of its perception. It's perceived as a major sign of gentrification, as something not made for low-income folks or people of color. We're not the ones, we don't think we're the ones being considered when bike infrastructure is coming into place. So it's important to dispel that by making a case for why it's beneficial to each and every group of folks that it will affect. And then something else I experienced in the current planning process. Do you think that the process still tends to view the universe of cyclists as wealthy, white, and young? And the answer is yes. The universal image of cyclists still resonates all too well with folks. I do believe a shift is occurring about the perception of who cycles. However, it is upon us, advocates, planners, privileged riders, and so forth, to ensure this changes. If we have power, we must use it to shift the perception. Statistics are clearly not enough to shift perception, so we must hire POC, or people of color, in positions of power, which also means we must seek them out, and they may not likely be in the common places we tend to search. We must also continue to ensure people of color and low-income folks are a part of every step of the planning and implementation process for bike infrastructure and transportation on a whole. Some other considerations when you are planning in an equitable way. When in planning spaces, make it your business to ensure a diverse representation of cyclists is being considered. Hire people of color, hire folks from the communities you are planning in, and be intentional about seeking out those people. What could transportation planners who may or may not specialize in bike planning keep in mind with regard to encouraging equity in their planning process? Again, realize your power. Do not make the assumptions about communities. Ask the community what it wants and needs. And diversify the conversation. Again, people may not understand how biking and infrastructure will benefit them, so you have to give a case for it at the same time because people are already weary of it. Be inclusive of planners of color. Make sure the decision-making table is representative of communities you are planning for, racially, class-wise, based on different gender identification, age, and ability. Think intersectionally. Why is bike infrastructure of interest to the various folks of groups in said community? Encourage planning and development in communities and for people that will benefit the most. Center them always in all ways. Become advocates for equitable transportation dollar spending. So this is really important because the average community person isn't sitting on Capitol Hill or at their city hall looking for how transportation dollars are being spent, but people who are closer to the field can do that kind of work. Make sure that kind of work gets done, that the transportation dollars are being adequately distributed. Consider and find out why communities may push back against bike infrastructure and address those concerns. Always meet people where they are. Here are a list of my sources, and this is Red Bike and Green Atlanta's information on all our social media networks. And then here's the contact information for everybody who presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zahra. I really appreciate it. We have gone over on our time fairly dramatically, which I think shows just how much there is to discuss on this topic. We are going to, even though we rolled over on time, we are going to, have about 10 minutes of Q&A. Those of you in the audience, you don't necessarily have to stick around to get your CM credits for this webinar, but if you want to hear some of the Q&A, please feel free to hang on the line. I see that we still have about 90% of our audience, despite rolling over on time, so I think the interest in the topic is pretty high. So I'm going to roll right into passing on some of our questions to our panelists. So all three of you, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourselves if you haven't already, and I'm going to let me find my first question here. We've received quite a few from the audience already. Okay, first question. I think it's primarily for Anastasia, but anyone can chime in on it. Is whether we should add sections specifically on women's issues to environmental justice documents.
I think so. As I mentioned, there are other countries that even it is a federal mandate to do this, then their mainstreaming policies basically asking how
Oh man.
Concerns these women's voices, but also having at the policy level a mandate that says that for every policy that we're implementing, the onus is on the agency implementing the policy to see how it affects women. I think that would move some of the women's concerns along a long way. And as I mentioned, there are a number of countries that have started in the last decade implementing these gender mainstreaming policies. Good examples are the United Kingdom, the Scandinavian countries, as well as Australia. Have you heard? Were you able to hear me?
There was some cutting in and out still, but I think the audience heard the vast majority of your response. I've got a question that I think is primarily for Kristin here, and it's regarding the limited English proficiency requirements or the low English proficiency requirements, LEP, and whether there is a threshold, either WMATA's threshold or from the federal government, on when that should be included as part of any plans.
Yeah, the guidance has some direction on that, and they are for languages, and I should probably get the guidance out and read it, but I believe it's for if 5% of the population or 1,000 speakers speak a language other than English, then you should look to provide materials in those languages. So there's a whole process, identification process, that transit agencies go through. It's called a 4-factor analysis, and it really it speaks to how you calculate the amount of encounters that the agency has with another language, and that's part of the process as well. But I'd refer the audience or the person who has a question to the circular itself, which is in my slide, and there's a section called the Safe Harbor provision, and you can read for yourself, but it does stipulate that if a recipient provides written translation of vital documents, it should do so for an LEP language group if it constitutes 5% or 1,000 persons, whichever is less, of the total population of persons eligible to be served or likely to be affected or encountered. So it's a mouthful, but there is guidance that will help an agency figure that out.
Thank you very much. I would just like to say we have probably 4 or 5 times more questions right now than we're going to be able to get to, but I'm just going to try to hit a bit of a diversity of topics. And there are a couple different questions sort of around the same thing, and I think any of our panelists could hit on it, although I think it directly relates to Anastasia's content, and that's about some of the safety issues on the transportation system, whether or not they really should be viewed as issues of the transportation system or of more neighborhood safety issues or social issues of social norms. Folks are sort of are quoting some places where such as Hong Kong, where women ride around in the middle of the night feeling completely safe, whereas in other places, obviously, there are issues of safety perception.
Well, the geographic context matters. What also matters are a number of the environmental and social characteristics of places. You feel much safer walking or riding around where there are a lot of people around you. This unfortunately does not happen in many parts of the US cities, with the exception of downtowns. A lot of residential areas are quite empty of people walking or waiting for the bus, so it's really a small number of people around. So I think that, again, we really have to look into our particular context, the neighborhoods that we're planning for, and plan accordingly. There are a number of things. I talked about multi-pronged strategies. Quite often this involves coordination not only of transportation agencies, but other agencies in the cities and neighborhoods and community activists. Safe travel, secure travel is not a simple one solution approach. But definitely the context matters a lot of the particular neighborhoods you're planning for.
This is Kristin. I think it should be viewed as a partnership in order to address this issue. I mean, it's not just one entity who should own it. And I know we as an agency have we've worked with some local nonprofits on harassment issues. But I do think it's even larger than us and the nonprofits. It's really an all hands on deck kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I've got a couple different questions again that sort of hit the same point. It's regarding Zahra's presentation, and that funding for planning efforts may actually be a barrier towards the type of inclusive planning efforts that you described. And it's just sort of an open-ended question into what your your response might be to that. A lot of times there's not enough funding in the planning process dedicated to the public engagement component in order to be able to meet people where they are, essentially. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that, and considering that Kristin, that you also hit on that, maybe your thoughts as well.
Yes, I can totally see how that can be one of the challenges, but also as a person who's run nonprofits, budgets are being created and we get to decide what goes in those budgets, and it's imperative to start including dollars to be able to do the inclusionary work that's necessary for equitable transportation. And I think that's just the bottom line. We pay a lot of top dollars for our salaries and for amenities and different things, and we have to believe that maybe making sacrifices in other areas so that we can do the type of what I think is the grassroots works that are truly going to provide the outcomes that we want, so that there's funding for those. And we just have to make adjustments within the budgets that we are given and that we're writing our grants for, or where we're getting our funding for, that it prioritizes these inclusionary efforts.
I think too, one of the things that we've tried to do through our public participation plan is sort of streamline the way that we approach public outreach and engagement. So, one of the outcomes of our work was to recommend that we have a lead office that really kind of corralled the activities surrounding public engagement, because we had a lot going on in different pockets of the organization, and I think, we'd go back and reinvent the wheel each time. So by doing some of this streamlining, we can sort of maximize the use of our resources and, really benefit from economies of scale in some places. And we learn how to do things better and more effectively and more efficiently through the processes that we've laid out. And I think as planners, that's, one thing that I think is important, is really kind of, process and, having procedures that can help you be better about what you do.
Kristin, we've got a couple of questions regarding how Metro responds to criticisms of disparate treatment or disparate effects. What are some of the mitigation strategies that you might use if a change to service is seen as disproportionately negative?
Well, there are established processes for complaints generally. So if someone makes a complaint based on a Title VI complaint that comes through our Office of Equal Employment Opportunity, then it's investigated. So we start with that if there is a complaint. Our job on the back end is to do the analysis to help in the planning and programming stages of whether it's service or fare changes, for example, so that as we go into the process, we understand where, I'll call them the pinch points are, where we, if we do something a little over and above that could impact a minority or low-income population at a greater rate than our thresholds allow, the job is basically to come in and understand that ahead of time, so that when it's brought forward as a recommendation, that we've mitigated ahead of time, if you will, that we've planned and programmed and to the point where we don't have that by the time it makes it to the public realm.
Well, thank you again. I think we're probably going to have to call it a wrap at this point. We're actually now 20 minutes over our planned hour-and-a-half webinar span, and so I just want to one last time thank all three of our presenters, and of course thank all of our audience as well. We had somewhere in the neighborhood of 550 people or different locations logged in at our peak, And so that is a nice big audience. There was obviously a lot of interest in this topic. Ben, from your end, is there any more administrative information you need to share?
Thanks, Brian. I just want to also thank the speakers for these really fascinating presentations. It's been my pleasure to be lurking in the background and running the tech end of it. I just want to remind listeners that they can log their CM credits by searching for event number 9003732, and this is by the Transportation Planning Division if you want to search by provider. This is our final webcast for the year put on by the Planning Webcast Series Consortium. We are looking for new and interesting topics for 2016, so if you've got an idea for a webcast, a great presentation you've seen, please get in touch with your chapter professional development officer or the leadership of your division, as the case may be, and suggest that so they can send it our way. Again, thanks to our speakers and thanks to Brian for moderating today's session, and have a good afternoon, everyone.